In a quiet house, in a village where nothing ever happens, someone has died. There are no screams. There is no blood. Only silence. For decades, one woman taught us that the perfect crime does not require violence, only patience. And that the killer does not always hide in the shadows, but in the living room, at the tea table, in the polite gaze no one dares to question. Her name was Agatha Christie. She lived surrounded by silence, by secrets no one fully understood, by disappearances the press could never unravel. A woman who learned from childhood that appearances are the most dangerous of lies. Christie turned her own existence into a silent experiment. She studied those around her, recording every gesture, every pause, every fracture hidden beneath apparent normality. Who was the woman who turned poison into art? What private obsessions lie behind her refined crimes? Each of Christie's stories is an unsettling reminder. Danger does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes what seems like fiction is the cruelest reality of all. The life of Agatha Christie is not a biography. It is a crime scene, and every page is a clue. Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller was born in 1890 in Torquay, a quiet English seaside town. She grew up in Ashfield, a large, bright house filled with rooms where no one ever seemed to be in a hurry. Her mother, Clara, possessed a powerful imagination and believed deeply in intuition, premonitions, and the invisible forces that govern human behavior. She spoke to her daughter as if the world were full of hidden messages waiting to be deciphered. Her father, Frederick Alva Miller, died of a heart attack when Agatha was just 11 years old. His death struck her deeply. It meant not only the loss of a protective figure, but also the abrupt end of the economic and emotional security of her childhood. From that moment on, the world ceased to feel stable, and this sensation of order suddenly collapsing without warning would become one of the emotional cores of her entire body of work. Agatha was a shy child, almost invisible. She learned to read on her own and quickly turned books into her refuge. Her shyness, far from being an obstacle, became her greatest tool. Years later, this silent gaze would give shape to detectives who imposed themselves not through force, but through attention. In her youth, she tried to become a pianist and a singer. She studied in Paris, but stage fright overwhelmed her. She understood that her place was not under the spotlight, but behind the curtain. Writing allowed her to control every detail without being seen. Before turning to mystery, she wrote romantic stories. For years, they were rejected. Each rejection reinforced her sense of invisibility, but also her resilience. She kept the rejection letters, reread them, revised her work, and tried again. She learned that recognition does not come quickly, and that patience can be a form of power. This idea repeats itself throughout her novels. The truth always emerges, but only at the end, when the reader has nearly given up.
People often ask me what made me take up writing. You see, I put it all down to the fact that I never had any education. Although I was gloriously idle, in those days children had to do a good many things for themselves. But I found myself making up stories and acting the different parts, and there's nothing like boredom to make you write. So by the time I was 16 or 17, I'd written quite a number of short stories and one long, dreary novel. By the time I was 21, I'd finished the first book of mine ever to be published, The Mysterious Affair at Styles.
The Mysterious Affair at Styles was published in 1920. Agatha had worked as a nurse during the First World War, where she learned the names of poisons, their effects, and how long they took to act. Poison became her favorite narrative weapon because it reflected her view of crime, intimate, calculated, and almost invisible. This novel deals with a case of poisoning and also introduces her most famous character, Hercule Poirot. The story begins with the sudden murder of Emily Inglethorpe, a wealthy elderly woman, under mysterious circumstances. Her death seems inexplicable, no one heard anything, and all family members and guests have seemingly perfect alibis. Poirot, called in to investigate, applies his meticulous and rational method, observing small details of behavior, gestures, and habits in each suspect. Through logic and insight, he uncovers hidden secrets, suppressed jealousy, and concealed ambitions that ultimately lead to the resolution of the crime. What initially appears to be an impossible act is revealed as a carefully planned murder. The novel establishes the classic rules of the closed room mystery. The killer is among the characters. All clues are present from the beginning, and the reader can attempt to solve the case alongside the detective. Each suspect has motives, secrets, and contradictions, revealing Christie's fascination with how human emotions and hidden desires can lead to crime. Even here, her skill at misdirecting the reader and building suspense through false leads and carefully placed details is already evident. The idea of Hercule Poirot arose from a very specific combination of everyday observation, historical context, and Agatha Christie's personal need for control. During the First World War, Agatha saw many Belgian refugees arrive in England. Belgium had been invaded in 1914, and many educated, cultured men found themselves living in small English towns, becoming strange figures, foreigners, polite, correct, refined, but always slightly out of place. She was struck by their extreme formality, their attachment to order, their meticulous behavior in a world that had become chaotic. From this emerged Poirot, a foreigner who never quite fits in, obsessed with order, symmetry, and small details. Someone who believes that human chaos can be resolved if it is observed carefully enough. But Poirot is not merely a product of observation. He is an emotional refuge. In a world torn apart by war, surrounded by death, fear, and losses that offered no comfort, Christie created someone who would not be swept away by chaos. Poirot is the mind that imposes order on irrationality, that believes every crime conceals a pattern, that nothing happens by chance, and that even the most monstrous act can be deciphered. His exaggerated appearance, the perfect moustache, the vanity, the precise manners, is no accident. Poirot is almost a caricature of absolute control. Unlike violent or cynical detectives, he solves crimes seated, thinking, arranging ideas. For Christie, who was shy and avoided direct confrontation, Poirot represented an ideal form of power, the power of silent intelligence.
Oh yes, the little grey cells have done well today.
After that debut, Agatha began to write regularly, almost with military discipline. In 1922, she published The Secret Adversary, one of the first novels featuring Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, Agatha Christie's adventurous detective couple. The story is set in post-war London, where the two young protagonists, bored and craving excitement, decide to establish their own detective agency. They soon become entangled in a mystery involving conspiracies, secret documents, and an unknown adversary who seems to anticipate their every move. As they attempt to unmask the culprit, they face traps, chases, and deceptions that test their wit, courage, and mutual trust. The novel blends adventure, mystery, and a touch of romance, revealing a lighter, more playful Christie, yet one who remains just as calculating in her construction of suspense. In 1923, Murder on the Links appeared, the second novel starring Hercule Poirot. The story unfolds in France, where Poirot is summoned by a man troubled by threats against his family. He soon encounters the murder of Paul Renaud, a wealthy industrialist found dead on the golf course of his estate, bearing clear signs of a deliberate attack. The investigation exposes a web of family secrets, hidden ambitions, and apparent falsehoods, as Poirot applies his sharp observation and impeccable logic to unravel the mystery. The plot combines murder, betrayal, and the interaction of seemingly respectable characters, revealing that even those closest to the victim may harbor deadly motives. In 1924, she published Poirot Investigates, a collection of 12 short stories featuring Hercule Poirot, in which the detective confronts crimes of various kinds: murders, disappearances, and seemingly insoluble thefts. Each story begins with an enigma that appears impossible to solve and includes elements designed to mislead the reader, reinforcing the tradition of the classic whodunit. Through meticulous observation, psychological insight, and his acute sense of order, Poirot ultimately uncovers the truth. Christie often devised her murders while in the bathtub or while washing dishes. Hot water, she said, helped organize her thoughts. It is no coincidence that many of these stories hinge on small domestic details that conceal complex crimes. Everyday routine becomes the perfect setting for horror. That same year, The Man in the Brown Suit was published. The novel follows Anne Bedingfeld, a young English woman with a curious and adventurous mind, who witnesses a mysterious accident in the London Underground. A man dies after falling onto the tracks, dropping an envelope containing crucial information. Intrigued by the connection between this event and a mysterious man who always wears a brown suit, Anne embarks on a dangerous investigation that takes her from London to South Africa, confronting killers, international conspiracies, and hidden secrets in a world of espionage and adventure. The story blends mystery, romance, and action. At its core, it is a fantasy of escape. Agatha begins to imagine characters who flee, who abandon their former lives, and reinvent themselves. Agatha Christie met Archie Christie in 1912, when he, a young pilot in the Royal Flying Corps, was immediately captivated by Agatha's intelligence and reserved charm. They married a year later, and at first, their relationship carried the illusion of an ideal romance. She, the astute observer, he, the decisive adventurer. But as Agatha Christie's career flourished, her marriage to Archie Christie quietly began to fracture. The emotional distance between them grew increasingly evident. He felt uncomfortable with her rising success, while she, caught between public admiration and private loneliness, felt a void that no applause could fill. That intimate tension inevitably seeped into her writing. In her novels, marriages are often portrayed as fragile arrangements of convenience, where affection hides behind courtesy and secrets lie beneath the surface of routine. Double lives, ambiguous loyalties, and characters leading fragmented existences reflect her own sense of isolation, the inability to fully trust those closest to her, and the constant suspicion that the truth is always one step beyond what the eye can see. On the night of December 3rd, 1926, Agatha left her home in Berkshire after a fierce argument with her husband, Archie Christie. He had confessed that he was in love with another woman and wanted a separation. Agatha was devastated. Her mother had died only months earlier, and her emotional world had completely collapsed. Hours later, her car was found abandoned near a lake at Newlands Corner in Surrey. The vehicle was damaged, with a dented radiator, and some personal belongings were found inside. There was no trace of Agatha. The scene suggested a possible suicide. The case became a national phenomenon. Theories of every kind circulated: that Christie had been kidnapped, that she had died in an accident, that she had taken her own life, or even that she was secretly working on a new novel to generate mystery. Some locals claimed to have seen her in impossible places, further fueling collective hysteria. The search was massive. More than 1,000 people took part, including police officers, neighbors, and curious onlookers. Newspapers published stories of people combing forests, rivers, and rural roads, some even in rain and snow, while journalists chased every rumor as if it were a breaking murder case. The creator of Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle, became personally involved in the search. He did not turn to private detectives or physical clues, but instead consulted a medium, giving her one of Christie's gloves. The medium claimed to sense her whereabouts, though she ultimately provided no useful results. The press could not resist pointing out the irony that the father of the most rational detective in literary history had turned to the paranormal. The entire country followed the story day by day. For 11 days, Agatha Christie was officially missing. There were no farewell letters, no clear clues. The silence was total. Finally, on December 14th, 1926, she was found in a hotel in Harrogate, staying under the name Teresa Neal, the surname of her husband's lover. She appeared calm, played the piano, read newspapers, and seemed not to recognize those who were searching for her. When she was identified, she claimed to have no memory of what had happened during the previous days. The official explanation was dissociative amnesia brought on by a nervous breakdown. Many accepted that version, others did not. Some believed it was a psychological act of revenge against her husband. Others thought it was a desperate escape. Agatha never clarified the matter, neither in interviews nor in letters, nor in her autobiography. That silence was final. What is unsettling is how this episode resonates through her later work. From that point on, her novels grow darker, crueler, and more suspicious of narrators and points of view. False identities, fragmented memory, and the idea of disappearing and reinventing oneself appear again and again. That same year she published The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, one of Agatha Christie's most famous and controversial novels. The story is set in the small, seemingly peaceful English village of King's Abbot, where Roger Ackroyd, a wealthy and respected man, is found dead in his mansion. The investigation uncovers a web of family secrets, lies, and deceptions, and although everyone appears trustworthy, Poirot discovers that the truth may be closer than anyone imagines. The novel is renowned for its unreliable narrator and for deliberately breaking the traditional trust the reader places in the story, a literary trick that was both scandalous and brilliant at the time. In 1928, Alibi premiered in London, a theatrical adaptation of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Agatha Christie attended rehearsals and the opening night, watching as her story, adapted by Michael Morton, came to life on stage. Although she did not write the script, she witnessed her narrative transformed into a theatrical experience, with audiences holding their breath as secrets and clues were revealed. Christie's reaction was one of fascination and curiosity. She realized that her plots could function beyond the page, generating suspense and emotion in real time, something the novel alone could not provide. The success of Alibi had a decisive effect on her career. It convinced her that she could and should write for the theatre. The experience taught her how to handle the rhythm of suspense, the tension of silence, and the importance of gestures and glances, elements that would become essential in her later works.
And of course, writing plays is much more fun than writing books. You haven't got to bother about long descriptions of places and people, or about deciding how to space out your material. And you must write pretty fast to keep in the mood and to keep the talk flowing naturally. I prefer to write a play as a play, that is, rather than to adapt a book. The only reason I ever did that was because I didn't care very much for what happened when other people tried to turn my books into plays. So in the end, I had to do it myself.
In 1930, The Murder at the Vicarage was published. With this novel, Miss Marple was born. The story takes place in the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, where everyday routine is shattered by the murder of Colonel Poirot, an unpleasant and controversial man. The death occurs in the vicar's home, at a moment when the entire community seems to be watching and judging one another. Through Miss Marple's perceptive gaze, the novel explores the hidden secrets and tensions among the villagers. She uncovers how, beneath the appearance of normality, lie jealousy, ambition, resentment, and betrayal, and how the key to the crime often resides in the smallest details that others overlook. From childhood, Agatha spent long periods in small English villages, places that seemed peaceful, where life unfolded with almost ritual monotony. There she observed a very specific kind of woman, discreet elderly ladies, seated in parlors or gardens, seemingly harmless, appearing to do nothing, yet knowing everything. They remembered old stories, detected the smallest changes in behavior, and above all, understood how people justify their worst actions. These women became the emotional template for Miss Marple. Unlike Hercule Poirot, who is born from a desire to impose order through logic, Miss Marple emerges from a far more unsettling idea. Evil is not extraordinary. It is repetitive. Christie understood that human beings at their core commit the same mistakes over and over again, only the names and settings change. Miss Marple does not solve crimes because she is brilliant in the classical sense, but because she has watched life for far too long. Miss Marple is also a projection of Agatha herself. Christie was shy, avoided the spotlight, and preferred listening to speaking. Like Miss Marple, she knew that people reveal more when they believe no one is judging them. The elderly detective thus becomes an aged mirror of the author, a woman observing from the margins, understanding human nature without illusions. Poirot is method, Miss Marple is experience. Poirot arranges, Miss Marple remembers. In this way, Miss Marple was born not as a fantasy of control, but as a silent warning. Evil can hide behind a polite smile, and sometimes those who seem most harmless are the only ones who truly understand what is happening. That same year, Agatha married Max Mallowan, an archaeologist much younger than she was. With him, she traveled through the Middle East. She wrote on trains, in hotels, at archaeological digs, surrounded by ancient ruins. These journeys intensified her fascination with enclosed spaces and isolated groups. Trains brought to a halt, ships in the middle of nowhere, hotels in the desert. Physical confinement became a metaphor for psychological entrapment. In 1934, she published Murder on the Orient Express, one of her most celebrated works. The story takes place aboard the luxurious Orient Express train, halted by a snowstorm in the Balkans. Samuel Ratchet, a man suspected of past crimes, is found murdered in his compartment, stabbed multiple times. Poirot, forced to investigate within a confined space where every passenger is a suspect, must discern the truth amid seemingly perfect alibis and hidden secrets. As he examines the smallest details, gestures, words, contradictions, Poirot discovers that the crime is not as simple as it appears. In this novel, Christie poses a radical question. Can murder be a form of justice? In 1937, Death on the Nile appeared, inspired directly by her travels in Egypt, followed in 1938 by Appointment with Death, an oppressive novel about a family dominated by a tyrannical figure. In 1939, she wrote And Then There Were None, one of her most iconic and disturbing works. 10 people, apparently unknown to one another, are invited to a remote mansion on Soldier Island under various pretexts. Once there, they discover they have been brought together for a dark reason. Each harbors hidden secrets, crimes that had gone unpunished. Soon, the guests begin to die one by one, following the verses of a macabre nursery rhyme. Cut off from the world, trapped on the island, the characters face paranoia, mistrust, and extreme fear. Poirot does not appear in this story. The reader is left alone with the mystery, without the guidance of a traditional detective, heightening tension and vulnerability until the shocking and chilling conclusion. It is her darkest, most enclosed, most merciless work. Europe was heading toward another war, and Christie captured the sense of isolation and fragility felt by societies threatened by imminent conflict. During the Second World War, Agatha Christie returned to work in pharmacies. Renewed contact with lethal substances reinforced her clinical perspective. In these years, she wrote novels centered on memory and guilt. In 1942, she published 5 Little Pigs, in which a crime from the past is reconstructed through contradictory testimonies, demonstrating that truth is always fragmented. In 1944, Towards Zero appeared. Its central idea, that murder is the final point in a chain of small cruelties, connects directly with her mature vision of crime. In 1946, The Body in the Library was published, a Miss Marple novel in which crime intrudes obscenely into a domestic space. The foreign body in a respectable setting becomes an obsessive image. The truth always emerges where it is least welcome. As she grew older, Christie became increasingly interested in memory, how the past presents itself as a puzzle distorted by time. No one remembers in the same way. No one tells the whole truth. This obsession is directly linked to her own disappearance in 1926, an episode her mind never fully closed. By refusing to explain it publicly, she turned that void into a permanent wound that reappears again and again in different narrative forms. By the 1950s, her fame was immense, yet her daily life remained discreet. She was uncomfortable with celebrity. She preferred anonymous hotels, trains, places of transit. In 1950, she published A Murder is Announced. The apparent calm of the village of Chipping Cleghorn is shattered by a disturbing notice. A newspaper announcement promises that a murder will take place at 6:30 p.m. at Little Paddocks. Tension immediately takes hold, and the neighbors, both bewildered and fascinated, are drawn into the suspense. Miss Marple, with her sharp intuition and deep understanding of the secrets hidden within small communities, becomes involved in unraveling the mystery. Every inhabitant conceals jealousy, resentment, ambition, and secrets capable of turning them into the culprit, and the detective must read between gestures, words, and silences to uncover the truth. The novel innovates by presenting the crime before the investigation, creating sustained tension from the very first page. Christie combines suspense with psychological observation and a subtle critique of the apparent normality of rural life, demonstrating how even the most peaceful settings can hide betrayal and dark motivations, keeping the reader gripped until the surprising final revelation. In 1952, she premiered The Mousetrap, a stage play conceived as a closed game in which the audience becomes a silent accomplice. Its success was immediate, and it has become a historic phenomenon due to its extraordinary longevity on London's West End stages. The story unfolds in an isolated winter guest house, Monkswell Manor, where a group of guests is trapped by a snowstorm. The tranquility of the place is broken when it is discovered that one of the characters is a murderer wanted by the police, turning everyone into a suspect. As tension mounts, secrets from the past emerge, and every gesture, word, and silence becomes a clue to the culprit's identity. The play maintains a steady rhythm of suspense and mystery, trapping both characters and audience in a claustrophobic, tension-filled atmosphere. The Mousetrap holds the world record as the longest-running continuously performed play, becoming an icon of mystery drama. During this period, her writing takes on a more melancholic tone. In The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, 1962, the routine of a quiet village is disrupted when a famous film actress, Marina Gregg, moves into the area. During an apparently harmless reception, a woman dies after drinking a poisoned cocktail intended for the actress, triggering an investigation charged with tension, memories, and buried secrets. Miss Marple, a tireless observer of human nature, begins to suspect that the crime is not an impulsive act, but the culmination of a deeply rooted personal tragedy from the past. As the investigation progresses, the glamour of cinema fractures, revealing a story of pain, loss, and silent revenge. The novel is inspired by an episode in the life of actress Jean Tierney, lending the character of Marina Gregg a deeper and more realistic emotional dimension. In 1967, she published Endless Night, one of her darkest novels. Here, love is portrayed as a destructive force, and crime arises not from greed, but from obsession. The story is narrated in the first person by Michael Rogers, a young man marked by ambition, social resentment, and a constant sense of fatality. Fascinated by a plot of land known as Gypsy's Acre, a place surrounded by superstition and dark legends, Michael dreams of a different life, far removed from the mediocrity he believes has been imposed upon him. When he meets Ellie Guterman, a wealthy and vulnerable heiress, the dream seems to come true. They marry and build their home on the cursed land. But happiness soon begins to fracture. Accidents, threats, and deaths surround them, and the story slowly slides toward an inevitable tragedy, where love, ambition, and guilt intertwine in a spiral of darkness with no return. The novel has an almost gothic atmosphere, shaped by superstition, guilt, and the idea of a cursed destiny from which no one can escape. It is a late work, written by someone no longer seeking to please, but to say something uncomfortable, that even the most idealized feelings can be a form of violence. Endless Night represents one of Christie's most daring ventures, moving away from the intellectual game of whodunit to offer a deeply unsettling psychological tragedy. As she grew older and her memory began to fail, Christie faced a silent fear, losing control of the narrative. For someone who had built her life around organizing stories, forgetfulness was the ultimate threat. In her final books, the structure becomes simpler, almost bare, as if she was stripping everything down to the essentials. Long before her death, she had decided how her characters' stories would end. Curtain, published in 1975 though written decades earlier, is a cruel and lucid farewell to Hercule Poirot. The action returns to Styles, the very place where the detective solved his first case many years before. Poirot, now elderly and physically weakened, invites Captain Hastings to accompany him one last time. Several seemingly ordinary characters gather in the mansion, but Poirot senses something disturbing. This is not a traditional murderer, but a mind that manipulates, incites, and pushes others to commit crimes without ever getting its hands dirty. As tension builds, Poirot realizes that stopping this evil requires an extreme sacrifice. The novel moves toward a profoundly moral and tragic conclusion, where intelligence, justice, and conscience collide irreversibly. In 1976, she published Sleeping Murder, which brings Miss Marple's story to a close. It is a tale about what the mind refuses to remember, and, precisely because of that, never stops haunting us. Gwenda Reed returns to England and settles into a house that should be new to her, yet it awakens an inexplicable unease, as if the walls still hold echoes of an ancient violence. A casually overheard remark, a trivial, almost accidental phrase, opens a crack in her memory and releases a terrifying image, a woman being strangled. Miss Marple understands that this is not imagination, but a repressed memory, a murder committed many years earlier and buried beneath silence. The investigation moves not forward, but backward, reconstructing fragments of a past that refuses to remain dead. Christie innovates by turning the mystery into a psychological process, where the key lies not in visible evidence, but in memory, trauma, and childhood fear that has survived the passage of time. The house, the home, ceases to be a refuge and becomes a threatening space, charged with invisible presences. Most unsettling of all is the novel's central idea, that crime does not disappear, it merely sleeps, waiting for the right moment to awaken and claim its truth, even decades later. Agatha Christie died of natural causes on January 12, 1976, at the age of 85, in her home in Winterbrook, Oxfordshire, England. In her final years, she suffered a progressive decline in health, likely related to memory problems and general frailty, though her family always preserved her privacy and avoided detailed public diagnoses. She died quietly, as she had lived much of her life. She left behind 66 mystery novels, 14 short story collections, 6 romantic novels published under the pseudonym Mary Westmacott, and more than 20 plays. Her legacy is not only literary, it is mental, cultural, and almost moral. She forever changed the way we understand crime, mystery, and human nature. She defined the classic mystery. She perfected the structure of the closed circle puzzle, where all the pieces are in plain sight, and yet the truth remains hidden. Her novels taught generations of readers to distrust the obvious, to read between the lines, to understand that every detail, no matter how small, can be decisive. She did not write stories of explicit violence, but of the secret logic of evil. She created characters that became universal archetypes. Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple are not merely detectives, they are two opposing ways of seeing the world. Both influenced hundreds of later characters, from crime fiction to contemporary film and television. She also left an immense cultural imprint. She is the most widely read author in history after the Bible and Shakespeare. Her works have been translated into more languages than those of any other novelist. The Mousetrap became the longest-running play in the world. Her stories continue to be adapted because their structure is timeless. The settings change, but human impulses do not. Thus, her life and work merge into a single silent gesture. A woman who observed, waited, and wrote, who turned trauma into structure, who transformed fear into method, and who, without raising her voice, left behind one of the most relentless explorations of the human mind ever written.